In this video, we're going to go over the unique characteristics of the AFOQT scoring and what competitive scores might look like. So a bit of a disclaimer with this video. There are two parts. Part one is going to be procedural, factual, objective. We're just going to go down the list of how the AFOQT scoring structure is set up. And in the second part, we're going to use a little bit of fuzzy math and talk about what's considered competitive scores. So statistics aren't solid on that one, but it helps give an idea. So more on that later. Let's get to how the AFOQT is scored. So let's get right into it. This is the scoring structure of the AFOQT. As of this recording, we are on test version T, so that's what I'm going to be using today. And these are the scores you will get from taking that test. So the first three are pretty obvious. We've got the various rated positions there: Air Battle Manager, CISO, and Pilot. Next one, verbal. That's pretty obvious as well. For quantitative, we're going to be using your math portion only. And for academic aptitude, that is going to take into consideration both your verbal and your math skills. So each of these scores is based on one or multiple sub-tests of the AFOQT, and we'll go over an example now. So on your screen, let's say, for example, you're interested in making the best pilot score you can. So what you need to focus on is your math knowledge, your table reading, instrument comprehension, and aviation information. And so you can just go down the list on each one of those that you'd want to focus on depending on which score you want to bolster up. So the AFOQT uses a percentile-based scoring system. So this is based off of other test takers. So for example, if you make a 50, that's not failing. That just means that you made right in the middle of the percentile. 50% of people you scored above and 50% you scored lower than. So you're right in the middle. So let's take another example. Let's say you scored a 70 on the pilot score. Then that means you did as well or better than 70% of applicants who have taken the test. Air Force Academy and ROTC cadets also take the AFOQT, so they will contribute to the score as well. Listed on the screen now are all the subtests that comprise the AFOQT. Like I said earlier, their self-description inventory will be graded, but your score won't be visible. And then of note as well, the physical science subtest is part of the AFOQT, but does not make up any composite score. This is essentially because it's in a pilot phase and they're testing it out to see if they're going to incorporate it or how they're going to change it for the next iteration of the AFOQT. So here's another look at how each subtest contributes to each score. So this is important because number one, if you're taking it for the first time, you want to know which subtests matter. And as you're taking it, you'll find your weaknesses on which subtest you're weakest at and just focus your energy on those so you can try to get the best score you can. And then number two is if you're retaking it, we have Superscoring that's now available. So you really want to hone in and focus on just the scores that you want to get better, meaning just practicing the specific subtests that account for your composite score that you're trying to bring up. So that leads us perfectly into Superscoring. So let's discuss Superscoring for a second here. I've discussed this in other videos, but Superscoring, what does it mean? It just means that once you take the test one time, you are allowed to take it a second time, and during that second time, if you score higher on any score, that is the score that's going to count. So let's say, for example, you made 99s across the board, and you just absolutely bombed verbal. It was the only one you didn't get a 99 in. Got like a 12 in it, or 15. Well, when you retake it the second time, you should not focus any of your time on any of the subtests that do not comprise verbal, that don't count for verbal. Focus all 100% of your energy on those subtests that count for verbal. So that way, when you take it the second time, you can bomb everything else except verbal. Looking for that 99 verbal. Once you've got it, you'll have 99s across the board. So now that we've got the scoring structure itself out of the way, let's talk about the juicy part, the competitiveness. Are you competitive with the scores that you have? Now, a couple things before we get into this that you need to remember because this test is very stressful. Number one, scores are important, but they're a small portion of the overall package. When you go to the board, the kernels that comprise the board are looking for a whole person concept. So yes, you do want to score well on this test, but it's not the end-all be-all, which brings me to the second point, which is all you technically need are passing scores, which I'll put up on the screen now what passing means. But that's it. To be competitive, you might need a little bit higher than these, but people have been picked up with pretty close to the minimum before. So it's happened. If you score, it's no big deal. Whole person concept. So listed on the screen now is what AFMAN 362664 says is a passing score. And we'll just read it here together. Everyone needs a 15 for verbal and 10 for quantitative. And if you care about the rated position, then you need to make at least a minimum of 25 on whatever position you're going in for. So if you put all the positions down, you got to make a 25 on all of them to be considered. If you just want to go in for pilot, you would just have to make a 25 on that. But everybody, regardless of job, needs to make a 15 on verbal and a 10 on quantitative. All right, so let's get into the juicy stuff. The reason you came here, are your scores competitive? So listed on the screen now is a spreadsheet that was given to us by Reddit user Nick Reithmer. I think I'm saying that right. They put in a Freedom of Information Act request and got all of this juicy information. So as you can see, there's nothing really cosmic here. Anything over the 60th percentile in any category is about average or above. And obviously non-rated applicants' rated scores are not as high as the rated applicants are. And then rated applicants' verbal and quantitative are slightly lower than non-rated, but not by much. And just remember, this data is all based off the last 5 years, so it's about the most accurate thing we have now. So here's where the little bit of fuzzy math that I told you about, fuzzy statistics, comes in. So on the screen now is a spreadsheet. Back in the old days when we used to have airforceots.com forums, we had a great person put together this awesome spreadsheet. It listed out applicants that gave up their information freely, their stats, and it seems to have been fairly accurate in my humble assessment. Now, some caveats with this. So understand that, number one, this was many years ago, so it's not as updated as the first list that I showed you. And some of the components of the scores have changed, so these scores are not apples to oranges what we have now. And then number two, these are all these numbers are based off anonymous people on the internet who may or may not have been giving correct data. So we can't know for sure. This is obviously not scientific, but I think it's pretty eye-opening. So let's go over it a little bit. So this data spells out the obvious pretty clearly. If you want to be selected for pilot, then you need to do well on the pilot score. Everything does count a little bit, but nothing counts for everything. So let's take me, for example. So this is me right here. I seem to be right in the middle of the pack, according to this scoring, this arbitrary scoring system they have put up. But I got pilot, which was my first choice. So we know it wasn't my flying experience that did it. I have 0 hours, or my degree doesn't show it on here. I had a non-technical degree. Well, music is probably the most non-technical you can get, one of the most. So it must have been some other aspect of my package, something to do with maybe my leadership experience, or maybe my personal statement, or an LOR, or a few LORs that I had. I don't know. It was something else, so we can't know for sure, but somehow, miraculously, I got picked up. Also understand that these scores are all of rated applicants, so obviously the rated scores themselves are going to be higher than for non-rated. So I think the takeaway from this spreadsheet in particular, it's got a lot of really good data in it, but all it shows is that the higher your score, probably the better chance you have of getting picked up. I think that's pretty obvious, but it's not the end-all be-all. So as long as you're passing, you have a chance. So this is the part of the video where I'm talking to that person, you who's watching this, who might be freaking out, wondering if your scores are competitive enough. Remember, the scores are a small portion of the bigger picture. Give yourself credit for how far you've come, and remember it's a whole person concept. As long as you're passing, you have a chance. Be happy with what you've accomplished already. Now that you know how the AFOQT is scored, you're ready to study. Watch this video where I go in depth on how to study for the AFOQT, and thanks for watching.